A congressional seat representing the Hudson Valley is up for grabs this November. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Vote 2012 election special. I'm Tim Cassidy. Tonight, we are bringing you a live debate in the race for the 18th Congressional District. But before we get started, let's take a look at where the district is. The lines have been redrawn for this election. This is a district that covers a large portion of the Hudson Valley. Congressional District 18 now includes all of Orange and Putnam counties, the western section of Dutchess County, and the northeastern section of Westchester. Well, right now, let's go ahead and meet the candidates running a very competitive campaign. First, we welcome incumbent Congresswoman Nan Hayworth. Ms. Hayworth was elected to represent the 19th Congressional District in November 2010, but because of redistricting, she is now running to represent the Hudson Valley in the newly redrawn 18th District. Professionally, she is a retired ophthalmologist. She and her family live in Bedford Hills, and Ms. Hayworth is running for Congress on the Republican and Conservative Party lines. We also welcome the challenger, Sean Patrick Maloney. Mr. Maloney is a local businessman who has served as a senior advisor to Bill Clinton. He then served as a senior staff member to two Democratic governors of New York. Mr. Maloney and his family live in Cold Spring, and he is running for Congress on the Democratic and Working Families Party lines. Thank you both for being here, candidates. We'd also like you to meet the panel of journalists who will be questioning the candidates over this next hour. First, representing News 12 Westchester and the Hudson Valley is anchor and news director Janine Rose. Ms. Rose has been covering local politics and elections in Westchester and the Hudson Valley for more than 2 decades. Also with us tonight from our partners at Newsday Westchester and Hudson Valley, Christian Wade. Mr. Wade is a reporter who has covered state, local, and international politics for the past 15 years. We also welcome Bob Marone. Mr. Marone is a news director and radio talk show host whose local news and politics show Good Morning Westchester can be heard weekdays on radio station WVOX-AM in New Rochelle. Now, each of the candidates have been briefed on the ground rules for this debate. Earlier, the campaigns picked numbers to determine the order for opening and closing statements. Sean Patrick Maloney, you will start. You have 2 minutes for your opening remarks.
Well, thank you all, and thank you, News 12. I'm Sean Patrick Maloney. I'm a Bill Clinton Democrat. I worked for years on the White House senior staff with President Bill Clinton. And when I came back, I started my own business, grew hundreds of jobs right here in New York. 2 years ago, my opponent, Congresswoman Hayworth, was elected in this Tea Party wave. And now we have a record of what her priorities were. And I'm sorry to say that at every step along the way, Congresswoman Hayworth has been voting with the Tea Party in Washington and not for Hudson Valley families. What do I mean? Well, her #1 priority was ending the guaranteed benefit of Medicare. That would mean capping your benefit. She calls it premium support. I call it a voucher, but either way, it's a capped benefit that would destroy the Medicare system we've always known. I think that's wrong. Her other priority was to cripple Planned Parenthood, to take away all of its funding. This would deprive 31,000 Hudson Valley families of good quality health care that they won't get anywhere else. In addition, she would cut Pell Grants, making it harder for kids to go to college. I think that's wrong. And she would make it more expensive for them to pay back their loans. I think that's wrong. Even when Hurricane Irene came through, it was the Tea Party ideology that took precedence over our own communities. What did she do? She stood with Eric Cantor and the Tea Party leadership to say, cut the budget if you want to fund FEMA, even while people were struggling with a terrible disaster. And the farmers remember. And even today, there was a report that, though she denied it, that's exactly what happened. Look, we can do better. I was on the team that balanced the budget the right way, that grew the economy, that put people first, the middle class first. That's what we need to do again. I look forward to discussing these issues with you, and I'm asking for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Maloney. Now, Nan Hayworth, you have 2 minutes for your opening remarks.
Well, thank you to everybody here at News 12, and thank you, Mr. Maloney. This election is about choices and character, knowing the character of our Hudson Valley, and choosing the character of our representative in Congress. My roots here run deep for 24 years. I started my small business, my own medical practice here, cared for patients here. My husband and I have raised 2 sons right here in the Hudson Valley. As your member of Congress, I've listened to small businesses throughout the Hudson Valley. That's why I voted to lower your taxes. And that's also why I voted over and over again to cut the regulations that are making it very hard for our small businesses to grow jobs and hire more people. I held 2 jobs fairs to help those who are unemployed here find work. And I voted for the Jobs Act to help small businesses get the investment they need to grow and hire. I voted to save Medicare and to protect Social Security for our seniors now and for the future. Unfortunately, Mr. Maloney has made questionable choices that do come to questions of his character. He voted for 20 years in Manhattan and only registered to vote here this past spring. He thinks if he says Tea Party and Nan Hayworth in the same sentence over and over again, he'll hypnotize you and demonize me. But if he really knew this Hudson Valley, he'd know that we're all members of the Wake Up and Smell the Coffee Party. High unemployment, high taxes, crushing regulations on our small businesses, and rising prices for food and energy and fuel. I want to tackle these questions and solve them the Hudson Valley way, working across the aisle to grow jobs, lower your taxes, and make the cost of living here more affordable. And I'd appreciate your vote as we approach this election so that I can continue working together with you for a great Hudson Valley future.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hayworth. And let's get right to round one of questions from the media panel. The first comes from News 12's Janine Rose. It will be directed to Sean Patrick Maloney, who will have a minute and a half to respond. Ms. Rose.
Good evening, Mr. Maloney, and of course, Congresswoman Hayworth. The New York Times today had an op-ed column about both presidential candidates, Mitt Romney and President Obama, wanting tax reform, but the likelihood that it won't happen because of the partisan divide in Congress. If elected as a Democrat to a Republican-controlled House, what would you try to do, if anything, to turn that around and bring much-needed tax relief to the middle class?
Well, listen, thank you for that question. I've worked across the aisle my whole career. When I was at the White House, later when I was in the governor's office here in New York. And one of the things I did was I helped write the marriage equality law in New York, and we wrote it so that Republicans could join with us. I'm happy that in New York, Republicans have asked the wealthy to pay a little bit more, something that the Tea Party in Congress would never do. So the kind of tax reform you're referring to, Janine, requires bipartisan cooperation. If you look at the way the state Senate is working with Governor Cuomo here in New York, that's a good model for how the country ought to work. Not every side gets everything it wants. You have to give a little bit. You have to listen to people. Unfortunately, my opponent has ruled out, under any circumstances, raising the taxes even 1 penny on multimillionaires like yourself. I think that's wrong. I think if we're going to ask people to sacrifice by ending Medicare, as the Tea Party would do, as defunding Planned Parenthood, as they would do, cutting veterans' benefits $11 billion, cutting Pell Grants, as my opponent has voted to do, then my goodness, we have to ask the wealthiest, folks like the Congresswoman and I, who've been fortunate, who've done very well. We should sacrifice something too, because the country needs everybody working together. I've done that my whole career. And if you give me your voice and your vote in Washington, I promise you I will not be working for some Tea Party Congress. I will not forget the Hudson Valley when I go to Washington. I'll be bringing your voices and your concerns, your family. That's what I'm going to be thinking about, and that's why I want to be in Congress.
All right, thank you, Mr. Maloney. Ms. Hayworth, you get the same amount of time, 90 seconds, on tax relief.
Well, tax relief has been, of course, a theme for me, and I voted repeatedly for it, but I want to get back to an issue that Mr. Maloney brought up in his introductory statement. He said that he's created hundreds of jobs after he left the Clinton White House. The company he founded was called Kayadex, and there are some questions about what he's concealed about that history. One of Kayadex's key clients, and in fact a part owner in the company, was Enron. Enron, the corrupt commodities and energy company that concealed massive losses and had its top management sent to jail. 1 month before Enron's bankruptcy, Mr. Maloney's company declared that Enron had, quote, set the gold standard for transparency in the energy markets, and that Mr. Maloney's company had, quote, supreme confidence in Enron's transparency and risk management. Now, that kind of concealed truth is in line with the hiding of the truth that Mr. Maloney did when he was the point man for Governor Spitzer on the Troopergate scandal. It also matches what he's hidden about where he lives and where he votes and his record of paying taxes here in the Hudson Valley. Mr. Maloney, our residents here in the Hudson Valley have some troubling questions now about your character and about the choices you've made. We deserve the truth, the whole truth. and nothing but the truth.
Wow.
Hold on one second, Ms. Hayworth, thank you. Ms. Rose is going to ask a follow-up question for Mr. Maloney only, and probably Janine, you probably want to ask about that.
I'll change it because those were serious allegations. So, Mr. Maloney, what is the truth?
Yes, they were. Well, wow. I guess in Washington, you know, it's part of this political game that you can just casually throw around things like people's ethics and make charges like that are complete nonsense. Let me tell you what, especially coming from you, someone who purports to value the private sector and respect job creators, I think it's outrageous what you just said. It has no basis in fact. With all due respect, Congresswoman, you don't know what you're talking about. The fact of the matter is I've worked very hard in my career to hold myself to the highest ethics. The reason I was asked to look into the Troopgate scandal in the governor's office was because I had nothing to do with it. And that's what you do. You ask the person who had nothing to do with it. In terms of my business, I'm very proud of the business we created. It has created hundreds of good jobs. And Enron went out of business long before we did that.
Mr. Maloney, I have to cut you off. Well, that should give you another chance to respond. We just want to keep it moving along. We're going to go now to our next question from Christian Wade from Newsday. And this question will be for Nan Hayworth.
Congresswoman Hayworth, this race has seen a torrent of outside money from Republican and Democratic super PACs, most of which has gone towards attack ads targeting both of you. Do you think that these groups the money should be limited by these groups that goes into these campaigns?
Well, I certainly agree that there is way too much money that goes into politics. And in fact, you know, I've been the target of a number of super PACs that have supported Mr. Maloney, including George Soros and his son, who have a super PAC devoted to, it seems, apparently to campaigning against me. There's been a flood of really nasty mail in people's mailboxes, and like you, I would rather see that go toward other things. Mr. Maloney has proposed a solution, and that is to have taxpayer-funded campaigns. And as far as I'm concerned, in behalf of our citizens, that's just welfare for politicians. So we have some serious issues to deal with in terms of how we dedicate our funds. There's no question about it.
Ms. Hayworth, thank you. Mr. Maloney, you now have the same amount of time, 90 seconds, on super PACs.
Yes, well, the problem is bigger than just super PACs. It's you know, whose voice do you bring to Washington? The Congresswoman, of course, she doesn't want citizen-funded campaigns because the healthcare industry has given her $800,000. Of course, she doesn't want campaign finance reform because Grover Norquist made her sign a no tax pledge, even for multimillionaires, and in return, she's getting $700,000 helping her campaign right now. You know, Mr. Soros is at least a constituent. Grover Norquist is not. And then, of course, Karl Rove. He's in this race, too. Look, folks, you deserve better. I think Citizens United was the worst decision of the last quarter century. If you give me your voice and your vote in Washington, we're going to work to disclose this money in politics. She won't support that. I don't think this money should be behind closed doors. I think it ought to be out in the open. I think we ought to have comprehensive campaign finance reform. Money in politics is killing us. You know it. I know it. We need to change it. We can't just keep talking about it. Working and middle-class people can't afford to run for office. Their voices aren't heard in Congress. And the Tea Party Congress is beholden to the biggest special interests in America. For example, my opponent is the #1 recipient of money from Indian Point of any Republican in Congress. She's #1. So it's little wonder that she just dismisses the risk of Indian Point, wants to keep it running forever. And she can't defend a record, and that's why you hear these bitter and negative attacks on me, things that have no place in a congressional debate. Congresswoman, I have been nominated by the voters to stand here and debate with you. So we should have that debate.
Mr. Maloney, thank you. Mr. Wade will have a follow-up question now for Nan Hayworth only, and you'll have 30 seconds to respond.
Congresswoman Hayworth, on the Citizens United ruling, do you support that, and do you think that it has cheapened political campaigns by bringing more outside groups into politics?
I respect the Constitution. I respect the First Amendment. I respect free speech. I respect the work of the Supreme Court, and right now Citizens United is the law of the land. I certainly support the whole concept of being responsible about the way we manage our campaigns and the issue of integrity, which of course goes back to the question I asked earlier about Mr. Maloney. We have to expect the best. We have to expect honesty from our public servants. And when you question the very facts of someone's work and their living circumstances, that's important.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Now we're going to go to our third panelist, Bob Marone from WVOX AM Radio. Your first question will be for Sean Patrick Maloney.
Mr. Maloney, speaking of the law of the land, Obamacare is now the law of the land. According to the Times Herald Record, shortly after a debate hosted by the Dutchess County Chamber of Commerce, you objected to the notion that you support Obamacare, as it's called, in its entirety. What are your objections to the entirety of the law, sir?
Right. I think there's lots of things we can do better. And I think we ought to work to fix what's broken and stop fighting and move forward. I think it's great that kids can be on their parents' health insurance policies. My opponent opposes that, wants to repeal it. I think it's great that seniors will get help in the prescription drug donut hole. My opponent wants to repeal that. I think it's very important that women not be discriminated against in health insurance premiums. My opponent has voted 31 times to repeal Obamacare. We've got the message, Congresswoman. We can stop playing politics with it. Why don't we fix what's broken and move forward? What's broken? I don't support the $700 billion cut that my opponent voted for twice. I don't support the Independent Patient Advisory Board. I think we can do better than that. I'm very worried about the effect on small business. I think we've got to be very careful with the thresholds and the way we phase it in. But I want to fix what's broken and keep going forward with what's right about it. I wouldn't repeal it, as Congresswoman Hayworth did, and I sure wouldn't replace it with a broken system like the one in Indiana that she seems to think is great, which went broke and had to be bailed out with stimulus dollars. If a bill this complex isn't perfect, that shouldn't surprise any of us. But what we ought to do is we ought to stop fighting and start working. There's too much fighting in Washington. I've worked across the aisle my whole career. If you give me your voice, I'll go down to Washington and I'll work to make this law better. But I would not junk it. I would make it better.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. And now we're going to go to Ms. Hayworth for a response on the question about Obamacare.
I voted twice for full repeal and replacement of the 2010 law because it is a massive burden on our economy at a time when we desperately need it to grow, and we can accommodate those great goals. Having everybody have access to good health care and affordable, portable health insurance without imposing a Washington bureaucracy that will run to the trillions of dollars. Mr. Maloney wants to impose that bureaucracy on you and take away your power to make decisions in your health care. He supports, up to a couple of months ago at least, he supported the entirety of the law. But one of the key components of the law is a massive new taxes, all of which are going to hit our small businesses, our real estate transactions, our savers who are relying on their dividends. All of those taxes are going to hit Americans as of January 1st, 2013. This is why I oppose that law. We need to replace it with a plan that will work for the American people, let them have the power to make their own health care decisions, and not be caught up in spiraling health care premiums, which right now, if you talk with our businesses in the Hudson Valley, Mr. Maloney, you would know that they're not hiring now because they can't afford to pay for their health insurance premiums. This law has been a disaster for our small businesses, and that's why it needs to be responsibly repealed and replaced.
Thank you, Ms. Hayworth. Mr. Marone, you're going to have a follow-up question, this time for Sean Patrick Maloney only, who will have 30 seconds to respond.
Mr. Maloney, you mentioned you were against the $719 billion in funds being taken from Obamacare.
That's right.
Do you not accept the administration's notion that this is money that would be made up with more effective management of health care?
I just think there's better ways to do that, and I've spoken at length about that. And my opponent, Congresswoman Hayworth, she doesn't want to tell you this, but she voted twice to take $700 billion out of Medicare. I think that's wrong. And far worse, she would destroy the guaranteed benefit of Medicare as we've known it for 50 years. Now, on the cost of Medicare, I'd like to see us negotiate with prescription drug companies who are charging us an arm and a leg despite the massive purchasing power of Medicare. My opponent won't do that. She won't get tough with the drug companies. Maybe it's because they gave her $800,000 for her campaign. I think there's lots of ways we can save money in the system, and I'd be happy to elaborate on those. But I would preserve Medicare for the promise it's always been.
We'll get back to you. I promise we'll give you more time later on. We want to get to some other questions. Panelists, thank you for your questions. But we want to hear from Hudson Valley voters during this debate as well. This week, News 12 reporters asked people out and about to pose a question for the candidates. Take a listen to this one.
My name is Denise Maldonado from Mayapack, and I'd like to know, what are you going to do if you're elected as far as bringing more jobs to this area, particularly for women, because women are the most hit in this economy?
All right, let's start with Ms. Hayworth. You'll have 45 seconds to respond. Job creation, and especially for women.
Well, Denise, you're exactly right. Women have been disproportionately hit in this bad economy. They have lost jobs at a higher rate than men have. They have entered the ranks of the impoverished at a higher rate than men have. This is a terrible economy, and we need it to grow. And the way to grow is to make our tax code flatter and fairer so that we cannot penalize businesses for setting up here in the United States, especially our small businesses. We need to cut the regulations and the red tape that are strangling our small businesses across the Hudson Valley and across the country. And we need to lower our energy prices. We need to build the pipeline. We need to activate our domestic oil production offshore, where we've already approved it. These are key measures that I have voted for over and over again in our House of Representatives.
Thank you, Ms. Hayworth. Mr. Maloney, you will have a chance to respond as well. Job creation, and especially for women.
Well, thank you. Look, Denise, I think, and I want to say something to all women, this is very important. Congresswoman Hayworth has had one of the most extreme and most conservative records on issues that are particularly important to women. That's a serious charge. What do I mean? Well, Congresswoman Hayworth opposes equal pay for equal work. She won't support that. I will. Congresswoman Hayworth wants to defund Planned Parenthood. That's terrible. That's mean-spirited Tea Party politics, because it's already illegal for federal tax dollars to be used for abortion. So why would we defund Planned Parenthood? And on jobs, one of the most important things is that women be able to move into good jobs of the future. Congresswoman Hayworth has said repeatedly that government should, quote, stop trying to create jobs. Again, this extreme Tea Party philosophy that says you're all on your own. Look, there's a job creator right in Orange County I'll tell you more about that Congresswoman Hayworth won't help, and that would be 300 jobs right here in the Hudson Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. It's tough getting it all in, I know, under the deadline. We want to get to another round of questions, though, at this time. We're going to go right back to Bob Marone. This time he's got a question for Nan Hayworth.
Congresswoman Hayworth, I'm going to stick with Obamacare, if you don't mind. Now, you have said here you voted twice to repeal Obamacare if you could. Now, the leader of your ticket, Mitt Romney, has said that he intends to preserve certain elements of the plan, such as those related to pre-existing conditions, caps, and so forth. We hear that the Republicans want to replace it.
Right.
Replace it with what?
Right, absolutely. Well, I have a plan, and I will share that with you right now. I'm going to suggest that we have everybody be able to set up a health savings account so that they can manage their health care costs reasonably and have the decision-making power. We should open up the insurance marketplace so that people can benefit from choice and competition among insurance companies. Most people then would buy catastrophic insurance policies, much more affordable, and they can cover their ordinary expenses through their health savings accounts. We need to have real liability reform in the United States so that we're not paying the incredibly heavy cost of defensive medicine and jackpot justice. And if we do those things, we will be able to help everyone who might have trouble getting insurance because of a pre-existing condition by having a very small surcharge on policies per month. We could do that in the state of New York. We could do that across the country. Mr. Maloney has not described his plan. And by the way, when we talk about repealing and replacing the 2010 health law, that replaces that $716 billion that has to go back to Medicare. It's a disgrace that it's out of Medicare because of that law. It has to go back in. I have voted twice to do just that.
Thank you, Ms. Hayworth. Mr. Maloney, your response?
Well, that's just flat untrue. You voted twice to cut it, and as Bill Clinton said, it takes a lot of brass to blame a guy for doing something you did. You've been out there saying I did it, which is just flat wrong. Here's the facts, folks. I just told you what I think about health care reform. I think it's great that kids can stay on your health insurance policies for a little longer. I think it's great that women don't pay more than men in health insurance. That's wrong. I think it's terrific that seniors are getting help with prescription drug donut hole. Very, very important. I think it's great that insurance companies can't deny you coverage because of pre-existing conditions. Every one of those things my opponent would repeal. She didn't vote to replace it. They voted to junk it. You know this. The Tea Party's been out to get that law right from the beginning. I want to fix what's broken and keep moving forward. We've had enough fighting and gridlock in Washington. Congress is broken. It's not working, and it's not working because, as CBS News said, the Republican Tea Party Congress and Congresswoman Hayworth were obsessed with this law and voted 33 times to repeal it. Not to replace, repeal it. And it cost the taxpayers $50 million. Enough. Let's fix what's broken and move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. We're going to have a follow-up question from Mr. Marone, and it will be for Nan Hayworth only.
Congresswoman Hayworth, would your plan include requiring everyone to have insurance, as was once promulgated by the Heritage Foundation?
If we make insurance affordable, then we'll have a lot bigger marketplace for insurance. We'll have a lot more people eligible for insurance. Everybody should have access to affordable insurance. Everybody should have coverage. So that's a crucial consideration. What you got from Mr. Maloney was a list, not a plan. I have a plan. We have to have a rational plan.
Thank you, Ms. Hayworth. And we're going to move to our next media panelist. Christian Wade from Newsday has a question this time for Sean Patrick Maloney.
Sean, there's been a lot of talk of Medicare reforms in this election, but not a lot about Social Security. What would you do specifically, if elected, to help ensure that this entitlement program is available for future generations?
Yeah, this is very important, and I think that we may remember that it wasn't long ago that my opponent's side of the aisle wanted to privatize Social Security. I'd be curious to know whether she still thinks that's a good idea. We can only imagine what would have happened to Social Security if we had had it with the current stock market crash in private hands. I think we ought to keep Social Security going. Look, I think Social Security works well. I think Medicare works well. This is about choices. We have kept these programs going for generations. You paid into it. That's a promise to you. No, but it's not a handout. That's not one of these comments Mitt Romney talks about, you getting something, the 47%. That's nonsense. You've paid for these programs. We can keep them going. Can we cut waste, fraud, and abuse? Can we do it smarter? Yeah. You know how I know? Because we did it in the Clinton administration, and we balanced the budget. These guys talk about it. We did it. Talk about a plan. We balanced the budget, and we would have eliminated the national debt by now if we had kept going with the way Bill Clinton was running this economy. That's the right way to go. We should not attack middle-class programs like Social Security and Medicare.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Ms. Hayworth, your response, Social Security.
We need to shore up Social Security and Medicare for the future. These are crucial programs. They are commitments we have made, and we must honor them, and we will. We start with putting back the $716 billion that was taken out of Medicare by passage of the 2010 health law. They have to go back in. We have to grow our economy so that we can continue to support Social Security and Medicare with payroll contributions. And we have to have a mature conversation about the future of Medicare. Mr. Maloney has not told you his plan for Medicare. I have voted for a plan for Medicare, a mature, sensible plan that will allow options for seniors so that they can control their health care and not have the federal government control their health care, as would be the case if we kept the 2010 health law in place with the IPAB that will surely limit access to care in order to fit budgets. We need to allow seniors to have that power to make those decisions, and the plan that I voted for does just that.
Thank you, Ms. Hayworth. Christian Wade's got a follow-up, this time for just Sean Patrick Maloney.
Just to get back on that, she mentioned that you haven't talked about your plan for Medicare. I mean, specifically, what is it?
Well, I just did. I mean, maybe the Congresswoman wasn't paying attention. The plan is to bend the cost curve down, to start using the market power of Medicare to negotiate the prescription drug prices. She won't support that. I think it's nuts that when you go to the hospital, you pay $10 for an aspirin. That's because Medicare isn't using its market power the way any private company did, the way I did when I ran a business. Congresswoman won't support that. And her plan is not to save Medicare. I'm sorry, that is not true. Her plan would end the guaranteed benefit of Medicare. You've been hearing about this all year. Listen, this is very important. The Congress and the Tea Party wants to end the current Medicare program, and that is going to be a disaster for the middle class.
Mr. Maloney, thank you. We want to get back to our media panelists. Now News 12's Janine Rose has a question. This round is for Nan Hayworth.